What does a former NFL executive think of Brad Holmes' approach in free agency? We find out.
You are Locked On Lions, your daily Detroit Lions podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's good, everybody? Matt Dery with you on a Wednesday edition of Locked On Lions right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, March 13th, day 3 of NFL free agency into Thursday, March 14th. Thanks for making us your first listen and checking us out wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Lions today are brought to you by our friends at Gametime. You want some tickets? Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. We got to talk free agency. Lions still taking that measured approach here on day 3. DJ Reader reportedly coming in tomorrow to talk to the Lions. Former NFL executive, GM of the year, actually back in 2000, the former GM of the Saints and Dolphins. Now at the athletic.com is a writer and contributor for the Athletic. NFL analyst Randy Mueller is our guest today on the program. What's up, Randy? Good to see you.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be with you. Looking forward to chatting a little Lions ball.
I love it. I love it. Your thoughts on what Detroit is doing right now? Certainly there are fans that wanted to see a big splash, Wilkins, Danielle Hunter, somebody like that, and a lot of money being spent, yet Brad Holmes has kept that same approach the last few years. How do you view what Detroit has done so far?
Well, I concur with Brad's approach. I think you can get yourself in some deep stuff if you're actually out chasing press conferences. And I think there's enough depth in this year's free agent class to where you can surely take a measured approach, but still get better. I think that's the big thing. And I think he's doing it for the long haul. He's making the decisions that are correct to build this team for more than just a tiny little window. And sometimes that takes patience with everybody, that's for sure.
It's interesting because Brad had made the comment a few weeks ago that we don't want to win in March. Like you said, win press conferences. We want to win in December and January. And they've won in the draft. They've done some nice things in free agency in the past, but they really have never wanted to make that splash. As somebody that has been in that room and has been a GM, is that something sometimes GMs hear from the top, or is Brad just doing what he wants to do? And there's no kind of push from ownership or anything else to make these kind of decisions?
Well, I think he's doing a smart thing without a doubt. I think everybody that seems to throw a lot of money at players the first day or two seems to be like they're using that one player away approach. And I don't think the Lions are at that point. They're not one player away. They've been successful doing it this way, gradually building a base and core of players. And I think that's what they'll do this year. I think fortunate thing for them also is that this is a good group of free agents. I've seen a lot of value still on the board that people are looking to fill needs for. And I think what Brad's approach is and has been is we'll check a few boxes maybe in free agency that'll get us ready to really make our hay in the draft. I think if you can fill a couple needs before draft time, it opens up your draft board to being able to take the best player available. And I think the Lions have done a good job of that.
Can you believe, Randy, and I know you were in the league a long time in the 2000s with the Saints and were very successful, and the Lions were always not a very good franchise, had their struggles. Certainly, I know you were probably on the phone back in the day with guys like Matt Millen and others. Can you believe this turned around and how you knew the fan base would be into it, right? I mean, but this is just incredible, right?
No, I can believe it for sure. It was the same way in New Orleans when I left after 20 years of running the Seahawks to go to New Orleans. They hadn't won a playoff game either. And so we were able to turn it around in short order. The rules in the league are set up for these kind of turnarounds. The caveat is, though, you've got to be a really good evaluator and you've got to value players. And that means come together with pricing, come together with what makes sense, and then matching them up with the schemes of your coordinators. And that's the big thing. And I think Brad's done a good job of that. He understands that the prize is not, to spend all the money and get out there in front of the curve, but it's to make calculated moves that are there for the long haul. And I think they'll definitely do that. I missed that part of it, to be honest with you. It is a strategic plan that takes some discipline to execute. And I like the discipline that they've shown in Detroit.
What about ownership, and how impressed are you with what Sheila Hamp has done? And, she just has hired the right people, starting with Chris Spielman, and then from there on down, and kind of stays out of the way.
Well, I think it's great. I think what they've done is and can be a model for others. I'll say this, I've worked for several different owners, and I like the fact that owners are involved. I want to be really pushed and tested. I don't necessarily want to be dictated to, because obviously the guys who, or the people who own teams, that isn't really their expertise or their area of expertise. But I think they can bring a little bit to the table in that they can test you on theories, on philosophies, just to make sure that you're doing things right and stay on the guidelines of the processes. And so I think ownership's important, but it's also important for them to know what they don't know. It sounds like that's been the case with the Lions.
Randy Mueller with us, former NFL GM with the Dolphins and Saints, 2000 NFL Executive of the Year, now at theathletic.com as an NFL analyst and writer. Take me through, when you go from 3 wins to 9 wins to 12, plus really 2 last year with the playoffs, does that change the Brad Holmes approach? How difficult is it in Brad's head to go, we got to go for it? We were 30 minutes from the Super Bowl. Or do you, how tough is it to have that consistency and not push that button to try to change things?
Well, it's really hard from the standpoint of they've ratcheted up, expectations now. And that's probably what we were talking about earlier. The expectations of the fans now are that we're ready to make a Super Bowl run. To do that, the players and the fits have to be real. And so what happens to a lot of these teams is they get undisciplined, they go make a run at that one or two players that they think puts them over the edge, and it doesn't turn out to be that they were great fits. The problem is that you've got to find the fits to fit your needs and then be able to acquire them in a value type situation where you're not cutting the same player a year from them. And I think that takes discipline more than anything. You've got to listen to your coaches. You've got to understand what they're going to do with players and then fit that criteria with what's available. You as a GM can't control the variable of what's available. You can't. So what happens is you end up reaching sometimes, and I think that should set Lions fans at ease that Brad hasn't reached for some of these things that some people feel like they need.
All right, so they needed corners. We know that. You know that. They go out and trade for Carlton Davis. Is he a number one in your mind? And what did you think of that move?
I think it's a good move. I think the whole theory of a number one receiver or a number one corner really doesn't narrate. That's not the narrative inside buildings. I think you need 3 or 4 good ones. Whether one's a number one, I'll let somebody else figure that out. I know we need 3 or 4 good ones. So I like the fact that they were able to come to an agreement, get him from Tampa, and not have to give up the farm to get him. I think that this is not a great free agent class for corners. And this tells me Brad found a different way to upgrade where we're at without having to go overpay for a corner that may or may not be what we want at the end of the day. So I think the more ways you can find to add players, this is one of them. I think you're better off, and you have to play the hand you're dealt. You just can't force the hand. And I think Brad's done a good job of that.
It's interesting. You look at Davis's numbers, if you're a PFF guy, and I'll ask you if you are, but I look at it and go, all right, he's declined over the last few years. He was very good that Super Bowl year. This past year, a 58.2 grade for PFF. I know his man coverage grade was higher. How much stock do you put into that? And you go, all right, I like that we're getting a guy that's a veteran, might be in decline, but he's on a 1-year deal. How much of that you think did Brad, to kind of get Brad's eyes open a little bit?
Well, I think that definitely factors in. I'm not a PFF grade guy. In fact, I don't know how you could be, because as a team builder, because they don't really know what you're looking for. They don't know your criteria at all for what we're going to do with him when we get him. So the grade has a little bit of a disconnect. Not that those guys don't know what they're doing. I'm sure they do. They just don't know our criteria. So I think in this case, he's found a guy who they think in their scheme can do some things well. Obviously, the length jumps out at you. He has some length. He will tackle. Maybe they're going to be more of a zone team as they evolve to the next level, and maybe he fits in with that. I don't know the particulars behind what their plan is defensively, but I wouldn't think that they would get a guy that doesn't fit what they're going to do on defense. And I'm not sure they were able to find that in the pool of free agent corners that are available.
Amik Robertson comes over from the Raiders. It's a 2-year deal. It's around $4 million a year. He's 5'9", but a lot of speed. How do you evaluate him? And do you like that? All right, as a 4th corner, a guy might be a little bit undersized, but if he's a ball hawk and he's aggressive, right, he kind of does fit that Aaron Glenn mold, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think there's some nickel tendencies there. A guy can come in and be your 3rd or 4th guy, play over the slot. Size is a factor. I'm not one that's going to be completely turned off by small guys, but my tendency is to think that small guys do get injured, and that's certainly not my opinion. That's kind of facts have backed that up. So that's probably why they got him for the price they got him. But again, you need 3, 4, sometimes 5 corners. You might be playing 4 at any given time. So until you can run, you have to walk and jog. And maybe this is a step in that direction. Maybe the cupboard was so bare that they just had to go find some guys, and they'll always be able to work to upgrade. If they structured a deal for Robertson, like you said, that gives them flexibility to then use that as a stepping stone to another really good player, that's the key.
Would you trade for L'Jarius Sneed and pay the freight for a guy like for $20 million a year?
I would not. I subscribe to the theory is we're going to need 3 or 4 of these guys. If we put it all on one, there's a lot of things that can go haywire there. I would not do that. I'm not surprised that the Chiefs are willing to move him. That's a big chunk of money for a position that I think might be better served by committee. That's all. And that's just my personal feeling.
No, I love it. Randy Mueller with us, former NFL GM at theathletic.com. We're with him coming up next. I want to ask him about what the Lions are doing at offensive line now. They keep Glasgow, Jackson walks, and Jonah got $17 million. We'll talk about it with Randy from The Athletic coming up next. But first, I got to tell you about our friends at BetterHelp. Locked On Lions is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're thinking about therapy, thinking about talking to somebody, a lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, what's the time for? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? Well, therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it and utilize your time that way. If you're thinking about talking to somebody, just getting some help and talking to somebody that is neutral, I want you to give BetterHelp a shot. They're really great. If you're thinking about starting therapy, try BetterHelp. Why? It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. And all you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with our friends at BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Love talking to this guy. Randy Mueller from theathletic.com has been awesome as we've talked Lions free agency. Of course, has sat in that seat that Brad Holmes sits in. By the way, Randy, do you miss it? Do you miss the free agency and making all these calls, all these agents? Or are you glad you're out of this right now?
I actually enjoy that part of it a lot. I love the fact that you can have that chalkboard in your office completely filled with deals. You've communicated with people to get there. And being able to juggle and multitask probably was my strength. That's why I liked it. And I'll be honest with you, some of my best friends in the business are agents and were agents at the time. So I enjoy that part of it. I like the negotiating part. The building of a complex puzzle is fun for me. And like I said earlier, I like the processes. So I do miss that part.
I love it. I love it. All right. So, the Lions, you kind of knew this coming in. They weren't going to be able to keep both guards. And this guard market has been insane. Randy, I can't remember a time, maybe you can, but nuts. With Graham Glasgow, got a very affordable 3 years at 20 to stay. Jonah Jackson, who's younger, gets $17 million a year from the Rams to leave. How did you view that?
Well, I think you got to pick your spots. I think nobody wants to see good players walk out the door, but you're right. I just don't think you could pay 2 guards that kind of money. And that comes down to personal philosophy as well. I think you draft tackles, you find a way to get solid guards. Maybe you pay for the communicator, the center that can kind of keep everything together up front. But in my fashion, I can understand why they had to let one of them go. I don't think a big change to an offensive group is replaced one part. I think it's a group that is the strength of the Lions, that if you can minimize change for the most part, you're going to find that they're going to be most effective. I think a lot of these places, I think you see it in the Jets, for example. They're always changing offensive linemen. They might have 3 new starters this year. That would worry me as a GM. I don't want complete chaos up there. I want to minimize change so that those guys are the one group of really football players that have to work together better than anybody. And to do that, they have to spend time together. They have to see things together. They've got to watch tape together. And so that's a group I want to minimize change with as much as I can, as long as there's not fatal flaws in each individual part. So I like what they're doing. I think you got to pick your spots, but try to minimize change.
I think if you Google chaos, I think it's the Jets logo, is it not?
Well, that could be. Now we're in the political spectrum, so who knows?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I heard Aaron Rodgers for vice president. That ought to be good.
Oh my gosh.
Could you imagine? We're going off topic.
No, I can't.
When you have a player, I mean, did you ever have a player like that? Like, Rodgers saying that he didn't talk to Brian Gutekunst and wouldn't answer the phone. Like, did you ever have to go through that with players where you went, oh my gosh, this is a total headache? Or most of the guys you dealt with pretty good?
They were pretty good. I don't think I could have dealt with this one. This is an odd one now. This is very unique. He clearly loves that attention and wants to be a part of it. And that is really hard. And now it's easy to see why Green Bay did what they did, right? Just you can only take so much. And yeah. I agree. Everybody should have their individual brand, their individual style. I get it. But I'm interested in building a team. That's all I really care about. I want to build a football team. And some of this stuff that you read about and hear about really isn't conducive to building a good team, especially when it starts with the locker room. So, it's a hard one. I don't know how Joe Douglas does it. I understand they've sold their soul to the devil and they're all in, but that'd be a hard one for me for sure.
So, all right, you look up and you see Jackson leave for the Rams. Do you then think at 29, where the Lions pick first in this draft, at least their number one pick, is a left guard, or you draft a tackle, move them over, and then you got a guy like that for 5 years? Is that a pretty good thought?
Well, I'm of the ilk, Matt, that I'm going to pick the best player I can that's available. And if it happens to be at a giant position need, it makes the pick even more valuable. But I'm not going to reach to draft a guard at 29. They have to have had a plan when they decided to let him go. They have to have had a plan in that they didn't have last season with 5 offensive linemen. They have 7 or 8 of them. So somebody's going to be able to fit in there. Yeah, if you can find a great fit at 29, I'm not against that. But I'm really not one for drafting guards per se to fill a need. If everything else in the big scope of things works out, fine. But I wouldn't force it to fill that need, that's for sure.
If the best guy on the board is a tackle, let's say it's a kid from BYU who's Penei Sewell's cousin or whatever, moving him to guard, is that a big issue? Or is it, we know we can move him over. It's you're going from the island to having help on both sides.
Well, the idea is to get the best 5 out there you can. So if he's one of the best 5, you got to do what you got to do. I don't think it hurts that a guy has tackle experience. I've done that several times where we drafted a guy who played tackle in college and made him a guard. It can be done. It doesn't happen overnight. I don't think these guys are necessarily plug and play players like the media narrative sometimes is. It does take time, but I wouldn't be against that at all. I think eventually you're going to need a third tackle as well. And if he happens to be playing right guard before then, more power to him.
What about at the receiver position? You just made a point and said, all right, it may be the best player available at 29. They're going to obviously have to pay Amon-Ra St. Brown a lot of money. He's going to stay. The Lions have said we draft, develop, and we re-sign. But what if on their board that best guy is a receiver? You look at St. Brown and Jameson Williams, what the Lions have. You pull the trigger on something like that?
I don't know about that because they may have more needs and other players graded similarly at other positions in that cloud of players. But I wouldn't be against it. I wouldn't say no because we have Jameson and St. Brown that we're not going to look at receivers. Because as you know, 3 of them are playing all the time anyway. So that wouldn't stop me from pulling the trigger there. I will say this, picking 29, there's a pretty good chance that the Lions will get somebody in their top 20, maybe 22 or 23 on their board. Now, who that is, I don't know. Those scenarios you have to map out ahead of time with intel and playing out all the scenarios, but they'll get somebody that they didn't think was going to be there at 29. Regardless of position, they just got to be ready to make that move. If it's a guy that they had as the 15th player on their board, it's pretty hard pressed, in my opinion, to pass on that and pick something else, just to use your example, a guard that might help them sooner rather than long term.
By the way, while I have you on the horn here, what was your philosophy on drafting kickers?
Well, I've been involved in drafting a couple. Yeah, no, I'm okay with it. But those guys are valuable. What do we say? Kickers are people too now. And all you got to do All you got to do to draft one
not
is
in
not
Detroit,
have
Randy. You know that.
yeah. No, I get it. I'm not opposed to that at all. But I think that kickers before round 4 could be problematic because you're going to have so many other players rated ahead of them that are every down contributors. And that's where the fine line is, right? Where do we stop considering every down contributors to take a kicker or a punter who's on the field 4 or 5 plays a game? But understanding they're very important players. So I understand it.
I'm more with Randy Mueller coming up next. I want to ask him about some remaining free agents that are out there and also some guys that got signed, what Randy thinks the Lions might have passed up on. We will do that coming up next on a Wednesday, Locked On Lions. Mentioned before, Locked On Lions brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Looking for last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, whatever it is. There's not a better place to go than the Gametime app. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy your tickets for your next big event. Gametime's the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They got killer last-minute deals, all in prices. What I love about the app is the views from your seat and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The deals on tickets, you can get them right up to the start of the event. Heck, you can buy tickets on Gametime even an hour after it starts. It's the best place to find last-minute seats. Do yourself a favor. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Randy Mueller from theathletic.com. Check out his work there at a big board of free agents earlier on last week, and joins us today here on Locked On Lions, former Saints and Dolphins general manager. Was there a signing that you saw, Randy, over the last few days that you went, wow, I love this, or wow, I hate this?
The one I really liked is kind of an under-the-radar one, but it's a one that the Chargers and new coach Jim Harbaugh made. The running back from the Ravens, Gus Edwards, I thought was a great get for them. They didn't have to pay a premium for a guy who I think can change the culture of what they want to do offensively. He's a 238-pound back, for those that aren't familiar with him, that runs downhill but is nifty enough to make people miss. And he's been underused with the Ravens because they're a by-committee type setup. And I think Gus Edwards is a great get. They're going to want to take their running game in Chargerland to the next level. So I really thought he fit Jim Harbaugh's personality and what he wants to do offensively. So I thought it was a great get.
Anything you didn't like?
Well, you saw when free agency started, a lot of safeties hit the market, right? A lot of safeties that were reduced from the league because they're making too much money. I saw a couple teams that I didn't love the fact that they signed older veteran safeties. That bothered me a little bit. Kevin Baird, for example, was with the Eagles. They traded for him last year. He kind of was very so-so there. The Bears kind of paid him a premium, I think, to bring some leadership and some culture to their locker room, and I get that. But I worry about these teams that think they can hide box safeties anymore because it's become a playground-type offense, right? They spread you out. If you can't run and cover and operate in space, it's hard to find roles for you. And sometimes I see these safeties as being victims of that. They just struggle when they get out in space. And hopefully that doesn't happen with Kevin Baird because he's a warrior from a lot of years with great production in Tennessee, but I'm not sure that's a great get for the Bears.
Lions are linked to DJ Reader, torn quad, not once but twice. So that he's going to come into town reportedly tomorrow, and I'm sure they're going to test the heck out of him to see. Big body to put next to Aleem McNeil. What would you think if the Lions maybe gave him a 1-year deal to kind of prove it?
I actually like him a lot. I think he's a good player, and you mentioned the health part. That's the only reason that he's even out and available, in my opinion, because when he plays really good. I think you can't go wrong at this point signing big guys and fast guys. And I know that sounds simplistic, Matt, but DJ Reader is one of those guys. He's a guy that can play the run. He's off box. He doesn't get knocked back. Those kind of guys, I think, are always a market for him. There's a guy, Gallimore from the Cowboys, who does the same thing. He's a big, strong dude who I think could play next to another tackle inside. These are the kind of fits that I think Brad Holmes you'll see make to fit their scheme and to firm up their run defense. I think those are good gets right now in this market.
What about Eric Armstead? Are you a fan?
I am when he plays. he just hadn't played much. He's played less than 30% the last couple of years. He is big, strong, athletic, really good-looking dude. I think he is more of a finesse guy than a power player. So if you need a finesse, maybe a 5 technique type, then he fits for that. I think you look at Armstead and you kind of think, wow, this guy, that's how you draw him up. When they get off the bus, you want him to get off first. I'm not sure the rest of it has backed it up, but I think he's a candidate and a good player. It depends what you pay him, I guess. I would like a definitive, unstuffing, tough guy to not get knocked back over a guy that looks pretty, has been inconsistent with his health and production.
Final thing, you look at the Lions, you look at the NFC. Obviously, we've gotten through free agency 3 days. Obviously, Philly has made some big splashes. People like what the Bears have done. Vikings are going to need a quarterback. Where do you put Detroit in the pantheon of NFC teams right now?
Oh, I think they're where they left off. They've gotten any worse. You said the one guard they left, but it's not like they've let a bunch of good players leave. So I think they will be hungry again. I think they understand what they didn't accomplish last year, more so than celebrating what they did. I think Dan Campbell will make sure of that. I think this is a good team that if they can add some more youth, another offseason of younger guys, maybe identify an ascending player or two here as we dwindle into free agency. I think this is a good group and one that I would bet next year kind of returns to where they got this year.
Are you paying Jared Goff $45-50 million a year?
Don't have a choice, man. I mean, he played good enough. I don't think they have any options that are anything close to that now. And I'm a Hendon Hooker guy. I think he's a really good prospect. But I said during last season, Jared Goff's going to get paid, and he may get paid a lot more than people think. But I think you have to at this stage. He's really a good player. He is connected with the people there, with the locker room there. I surely would not let that walk out the door. And the going rate now is $50 million. So just got to grin and bear it and say he deserves it.
Randy, it was an honor, my friend. This was fantastic. Thanks so much. Great work. And we'll have to do it again sometime. Thank you.
My pleasure, Matt. Anytime.
There he is. Randy Mueller with us from theathletic.com. Read his stuff. Former NFL executive here on a Wednesday at Locked On Lions.